love to turn it over to Chad Allen. He's going to be talking about the need for living a skeptically minded life in this complex world. Thank you so much, Chad.
Yay!
Thanks so much. I can remember the very last thing is you go in the room, and again, this is 1988. This is before Americans with Disabilities Act or anything along these lines. And the doctor comes in and he explains to me what's going on, and my father and my stepmother were there in the room. And, yes, this is what you have, and there was considerations of, some vitamin deficiency type stuff that, they considered as a possibility for a cure. That later was, proven not to be really all that useful. What I've heard from a lot of doctors over, the span of 30 some odd years is, wait 5 years for science to catch up with the condition. But at 15, the doctor said to me, he said, do you have any questions? And I can remember literally wanting to do nothing but get out of that room. And so I walked away saying no. And I left, and my parents dropped me off at a mall at the time. And I kind of walked into a store where the comic books were being sold, which I was a big fan of. I'll explain that here in a little bit. But, and I really couldn't see the comic books, but I was like pretending I kind of could see, type of a thing, just to kind of feel a little bit normal. But, by the end of it, I was so incredibly frustrated, I just ended up like, walking behind the mall and kind of like processing this for the first time. And, I wouldn't even say the word blind. Like, that was something that was so foreign to me, and something later on that I would, learn to understand a little bit more differently as I go. But let me keep going here. I was, throughout my childhood, I was a huge fan of the arts in a lot of different ways. I started as a competitive tap dancer as a child. I started at 5 years old, and I competed up and down the East Coast. I'm originally born and raised in Rhode Island, hence, Mass Eye and Ear in Boston, which is where I got diagnosed. And I also lived relatively close to RISD's art college, so I would spend a lot of time with students and go to their studios and paint still lifes and charcoal and all these different kinds of things that no other kid that I really knew was doing, honestly. But I just absolutely loved it. The peace that I felt being around other artists and learning this amazing craft, and being able to express myself in such creative ways really, really motivated me in a very intimate way. I also loved Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. I'm sure there's D&D fans out here somewhere. And so again, the idea of telling stories and creating these, letting my imagination just fly has always been something that I've loved to do. And I will say, I'll tease this a little bit, loving art and understanding it from a sighted perspective, and then going through a journey as a blind person, I've had to kind of reevaluate and figure out what that means. And I think I've done a pretty decent job, but I'll get there. I was also born and raised Catholic. So I went to Catholic school, elementary school. Rhode Island is pretty much 98% Catholic as it is. You're either, hang out with the Italian kids or the Irish kids for the most part when I was growing up. And, I went to, I was an altar boy. I did all the services. My favorites were the funerals and the weddings because I usually got paid. I can remember really feeling a connection with God, at a very young age. there were often times that I got to spend a lot of time alone in the sanctuaries because of preparing the services before the priest came in to do whatever rituals that we were doing at the time. And my church wasn't like the most elaborate of all the Catholic churches, but all of them have are littered with symbolism everywhere. So you have the altar, the crucifix, the statue of Mary, the golden tabernacle, the marble altar, the hand-carved pews, the bas-reliefs of the Stations of the Cross on the wall. And it was a very intimate and deep feeling that I had. And I could really, at the time when I was 10, really thought that I felt the presence of God. And it was something that was also very, very normal for me growing up. The idea of skepticism didn't come much, much later into my life. And I think a lot of people experience that, maybe more so then than now. I'm not sure. I know that, the percentages of people that go to church these days has been diminishing quite a bit, but again, these big, really emotional feelings of faith can be very, very strong, especially for a child. My note here says nostalgia, which is true. That I'm thinking back on it now, and especially when I was thinking about this presentation and having those moments, it's something that I haven't really thought about in a very long time. So I don't know if there's people in the audience that have had those kinds of experiences before, but it can feel very, very real, especially when you're not exposed to any science-based or critical thinking in your world at all. While I was losing my sight and going blind, it was very difficult to kind of handle that. I mean, first I'm a teenager and I'm going through these experiences of not being able to necessarily do my schoolwork as well. Again, this is before ADA, so the accommodations or the IEP programs were not really readily available for me at the time. So kind of fumbling my way through dating and getting my homework done and hanging out with friends. Eventually, all those things that I really focused on as a child that I really cared about, like dancing and the arts and stuff like that, I started to lose that a little bit because there was just so many things that I was trying to figure out in my life. However, my faith in God didn't necessarily deteriorate. Instead, I went the completely other direction. I started dating this girl in high school, and her father was a pastor of a non-denominational church, a born-again church. And so, teenager, parents got a divorce, losing my eyesight, moving to a new school, meeting this girl, connecting with their family, like all this stuff started to really, I gravitated so deeply towards that because I needed an answer, and there really wasn't anything out there for me at the time. That was an interesting journey because if you know anything about the born-again faith, they're very much into the study of the Bible. So it's like this illusion of deep education and insight and using the knowledge of the Bible, whereas if you know anything about the Catholic faith, you really just sit, stand, kneeling for the most of the time when you're in church. And you may listen to the homily that the priest gives for 5 or 10 minutes during the service, but having a deep understanding of the Bible, this became a draw. This became a big attraction to me. As now I'm really understanding or uncovering this mystery of faith, like the mechanics of faith. And so, with my teenage brain, my imagination, my creativity, my love of Dungeons and Dragons, like I would kind of combine all these things in my brain and create this amazingly powerful idea of what it is to be a true believer. And so I was also supported in a lot of ways, obviously by the community, because there was other kids like me that were going to Bible studies and going to camps and, having these activities and this sense of belonging. It truly became this intoxicating thing that really took over my life. I spent more and more time there and less time almost with my own family. Again, that sense of belonging was so strong. And as a teenager, you want to kind of make things into your own. And so the idea of making religion or Christianity cool was a very big mission of the people that I was spending time with. So we were doing a lot of like theater type stuff that was, Christian based, and rock concerts. Instead of death metal, it was life metal.
Oh no.
Right? And, and so we would redress. It was still the same heavy metal t-shirts, but with all the attractions of Christianity, instead of the other stuff that was out there. The interesting thing, though, is that the sex, the drugs, and the rock and roll didn't go away. So, we were still doing all the same exact things that teenagers did. We just masked it into something else. And, eventually, things start to go south, of course. And we broke up. I know. So, right? But, it was devastating. Because I felt like not only was I losing a girlfriend, but I was losing a family, I was losing a church, I was losing a whole community. And I eventually, and still dealing with my vision loss, going to spirit healers to heal my eyes wasn't something that was something that did happen from time to time. It wasn't an obsession, but, I can remember being in rooms where that was certainly a part of it. And so to lose all of that was also very hard. But I ended up moving away. I moved to Denver, Colorado. I was supposed to move there with my girlfriend at the time, but because we broke up, I decided to go nonetheless. And because of my vision loss, I also decided, if I was going to see the world, I better do it now before I can't any longer, which is a pretty dark point of view on how to live one's life. But again, at this time, I wasn't even saying the word blind. Like, I didn't understand the experience that I was going through. That one chance that I had to ask the questions that I needed to ask in the doctor's office was far in the rearview mirror. And I was just kind of stumbling my way through everything to try and figure it out, because there was no resources that I was aware of to help me with this condition. Medicine failed me on this front. And, to not be able to have that, meant that I had to do it other ways. So I would still try and keep my dedication to faith as strong as I possibly could. But eventually, the attractions of, the community and the family and atmosphere and the culture and the girlfriend and all of those things, it started to lose its luster. It became harder and harder for me to maintain. But it wasn't that I was giving up the idea of God, it was just that I wasn't as committed to Bible studies and church and things like that. Art started to become a part of my life a little bit again. I ended up finding myself at a magic shop in Denver, Colorado, and I started demonstrating magic tricks at a magic counter at a toy store. And it was a joy. It was an ability for me to be vocal with my creativity for the first time. As a tap dancer, you're expressive with your body, but you're not necessarily expressive with your words. And so I started to find myself being with other people, some of faith, some of not. This was the 90s in Denver. There was still a lot of spirituality in the world, but it wasn't necessarily Christian-based spirituality. There are also some massive churches. There's one called Happy Church in Colorado. Has anybody heard of that?
No.
It is, they took an entire 1980s mall, like full-size mall, and they turned it into a Christian complex.
Wow.
And I don't even know if it's still around anymore, but like every little boutique shop was another office dedicated to some area of faith. And then another big thing happened in my life is I decided to go back to college. Now, even though I was still dealing with some severe vision loss, I was able to, with magnification or straining as much as I possibly could to see what I could see. I was getting away with whatever I could the best I could, but I was not adopting blindness in any way, shape, or form yet. How's everybody doing? How's my time?
Great.
Good? Okay, good.
5 more minutes.
Okay, great. Sorry, one second. With progressive degenerative diseases, like retinitis pigmentosa, eventually there becomes a point where you can't avoid those things anymore. I lost my sight in stages. So, first it was, it took me longer to adjust from dark to light or light to dark. And then eventually that was, I could drive, but only during the day. And then it was, I couldn't drive at all. And then it was, I had to use magnification to read a book. Then magnification didn't solve the problems anymore. And slowly but surely, this deterioration got to the point where nothing was working. And, obviously I got, very depressed, and there was really no solution whatsoever. And this is where I was able to find, finally, what I call the cure to my blindness, which was an organization called the Colorado Center for the Blind. And it was an adult rehabilitation training center that was run by blind people, and mostly. And it was a program that I did 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 months. And so I immersed myself in a completely new community of blind people that had all the confidence in the world of their abilities within the skills of blindness. And so I was able to learn through the training how to travel with a long white cane, how to read Braille, how to use adaptive technology, how to do home management type skills, whether it's putting braille labels on your spices, or coming up with organizational systems that make things a little bit easier. And those were like the basics. But when I got down to it, we went far above and beyond those skills. I went rock climbing with sleep shades because I had some residual vision, so I wore blindfolds. I went whitewater rafting blindfolded. I drove a car on a racetrack blindfolded. I hydroplaned a car blindfolded. I went hiking in the Rocky Mountains blindfolded. I've skied blindfolded. And all of these types of what some people would consider extreme things, really just took your perspective of what you could do, so that when you were facing something mundane, like getting through an airport, or going on a date, or cooking for your kid, these things became very simple because of my perspective completely changed. If I could climb a mountain, I can cross a street. If I can ski down a hill without sight, then I can raise a family. And that empowerment became really, really strong. There was also another program that they did called a philosophy class. So we talked about the philosophy of independence, where the law sits for people with disabilities. What are our rights? When you drive a bus, if somebody's not allowing you to sit somewhere or something along those lines, like you have a right to refuse accessibility. And we didn't know that at the time. So like if I go to a concert and the disability seating is all the way in the nosebleeds and I want to sit closer, I have a right to buy the ticket to the closer seat if I'm going to pay for it, and that cannot be refused because of the law. So my resolve in the skeptical perspective, I guess, of blindness started to kind of fuse a little bit with my religious beliefs about blindness. So I started to go back to what the religion said, what the Bible said, right? And when you look at how blindness is depicted in the Bible, it's extremes, right? It's one or the other. You're either stricken with blindness because of sin, right? Or you are gifted with this special sight into the invisible world, and you are special above and beyond what mortal man is able to experience, because now I have the ability to look into the face of God, right? And that reality, that expectation is impossible to live up to. And so my mind kept going into the more realistic point of view of what it is to be blind. And so, I know I'm running out of time, but I'll say this part really quick. Eventually I got married. Eventually I had a child. Eventually I came out to Los Angeles and started working as a professional magician, public speaker. I work in the disability community from time to time. I was a stay-at-home dad for a number of years. And when my son was born, the idea, I was not practicing the religious aspects of my faith any longer, but there were still those residual elements of my faith that I didn't quite necessarily deal with because it wasn't something that was there on a daily basis. When you have a child, everything becomes important all of a sudden. And that idea of honor thy father and thy mother, what I realized was that it was creating a sense of guilt in my mind that I didn't want, necessarily to feel any longer. And so when my wife and I were talking about how to raise this child, because we were both raised with some element of religiosity in our life. The idea of raising a child without religion was an extremely foreign concept to me. But I decided that I really wanted to make sure that this kid had the best skills possible. And fortunately for me, in this sense, he was kind of very critically minded from the beginning. There's just kids that are sometimes like that. We chose to send him to an Episcopal school because it was going to be the best education at the time for us. And it was like Christian light. So we were kind of like, all right, we'll do it. And he came home from school one day and he says to me, "Dad, I don't believe in God." And I said, okay. I said, you know, there's a lot of people that do, and if that's something that you decide for your life, that's okay. And he's like, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, I really don't, buddy. And he's like, okay. You know, and he walks away and goes plays with his Legos or whatever. The next day he comes home from school and he goes, "Dad, I don't believe in ghosts." And I said, well, you know, I said, some people believe in ghosts, but it's okay. And he says, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And I said, well, no, buddy, I really don't. And, you know, this kid grew up at the Magic Castle. So there's a ghost that plays the piano inside the Magic Castle. Irma. And my son has a very intimate relationship with Irma. He's had since his whole life. And he stops for a second and he goes, "Well, what about Irma?" And I said, "Okay, you got me. I believe in ghosts." Only one. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we can take a few from the audience. I have to ask these Christian metal bands. I'm sure Stryper was one of them.
Yeah, but Stryper was like the kind of uncool
Yeah.
one of the group. Like I was into like Mortification, you know,
Oh, okay.
and Crucifix. And,
Tourniquet?
Oh, yes.
I was raised very Christian, was always looking for, you know, alternatives to actual good music.
Yes.
Skillet, I was into Skillet. They were kind of like more of a...
Larry Norman.
Oh, Larry Norman,
One of the
yeah.
greatest rockers of Christian stupidity. I love him.
Amazing musician, absolutely.
I talked to him on the phone